first exposure to Rollerball was the poster, which I looked at, and I think anyone can agree it's totally rad. The movie is about a game played in the future where men strap on Mad Max football armor and roller skate around in a giant donut trying to grab a big pinball, and that sounds like a lot of fun, but not very serious. But Rollerball is one of those movies that's a lot smarter than it looks. In fact, it's easily one of the most thought provoking and humanistic movies to ever come of Hollywood. From the opening sequence, you can tell that this is something different. A cruder movie would start in the middle of the action, the game already in progress, bodies colliding, senses made to buzz at the audacious kinetics that come without context. The game is a blur. Explanations follow only after the viewer has been properly sensitized. Instead, what we get is masterful. I don't think that the movie could work without this opening sequence, because it sets the tone for everything to follow. And the way it does this is that it makes Rollerball real. Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor plays over shots of an arena shrouded in darkness. We see the faces of the spectators, their eyes shining, faces tense with anticipation. The players skate onto the field slowly, and the viewer can only see them from a distance as they do. The scene has a ritualistic atmosphere that we are immediately drawn into before the ball is even thrown. Now take your pick from the superhero movies that make up our entertainment today. These are movies dealing with fantastic but ultimately serious concepts. Demigods fight battles with the world of mortals in the balance. But the characters are never in danger. They quip and joke because the screenwriters and directors need to insert layers of humor and irony to protect you from having to take the movie seriously. You must be protected from the urge to make an emotional investment in the plot and characters, beyond just simply being entertained. If you were to do so, if you were to examine the movie with deep thought, its shallowness would be revealed, the illusion broken. So the movie winks and nods at you, and it asks you to do the same, to return that wink and a nod, to acknowledge that this movie is not serious and that you will not take it seriously, and that this is okay because they aren't taking it seriously either. And the second that you do this, you become complicit in the farce. But it's because Rollerball opens the way that it does that you're made aware this is not a silly movie. Now, the game may seem silly to us, at least in concept, but in the universe of the movie, it represents something very serious, something real and respected by its characters. And if the movie is willing to go that distance to show us that and treat it like that, then we, the audience, can accept it as well. This is a very basic tenet that is missing from a lot of movies now and even of that time, but it's present here. Now, moving on. The players and spectators stand for a corporate anthem, and we're introduced to our hero, star player Jonathan E., portrayed by James Caan. Now, what follows the anthem is the game proper, and it's amazing. Without a single word of exposition, we see the game of rollerball play out in all its excitement and its speed and violence, but without any unnecessary flourishes. The game is shown in a way that we intuitively realize how it is played, how the scoring works, and the amount of skill and teamwork involved. And now the game is no longer silly. It's completely real, without a word being spoken. Why is it so important that the sport of rollerball be treated seriously? Well, aside from the fact that a movie that cannot take its central concept seriously is not going to inspire trust in the viewer, it's also because the great sports movies are never really about sports. Now, Rocky is not really about the match with Apollo, and The Longest Yard isn't about football. In these movies, the characters pour themselves into that sport because the game is the only way available through which they can express themselves. And when they struggle in that sport, what they are enacting is a kind of life in miniature. And this is only made possible if the sport is taken seriously enough so that the audience can understand why and how it's so sacred to these people. protagonist of Rollerball is Jonathan E., star player of the Houston team. He's the best player in the history of the game, with talent, experience, and ability far beyond any of his peers. And although he's been playing this punishing game for 10 years, he's still in his prime. One day, after another victory, he's approached by the team owner and told that he has to retire, even though he does not want to. He refuses, and it's made clear to him that this is not a choice. Choosing to cast James Caan for the role was a great decision on behalf of the filmmakers. Caan, with his ruggedly handsome and cruel features, is perfect for the role of the seasoned athlete. He's warm and easygoing off the field, but he's remorseless on the field. Violence, being another part of the game, is something that Jonathan doesn't hesitate to engage in, casually and brutally. Most modern filmmakers would be livid at the thought of their protagonist being like Jonathan E. Our protagonists now are not allowed to have significant character flaws or exude the threatening atmosphere that Kahn's Jonathan does. This is not Aristotle's great-souled man, subject of so many Hollywood dreams. Jonathan is someone more along the lines of the classical heroes of mythology, a flawed but noble Superman in the vein of Achilles or Hector. Criticisms of the movie have taken issue with Jonathan's distant character. James Caan even said that he felt Jonathan was emotionally stunted and that it limited his ability to portray him to his satisfaction. But Jonathan's lack of emotiveness makes perfect sense for his character and within the context of the narrative. Later on, Jonathan is revealed to actually be quite a sentimental and emotional man, with deep feelings of nostalgia, longing, curiosity, ambition, loyalty, and love. Indeed, he seems to feel these things much more strongly than the people around him. Just by refusing to retire in his prime, he breaks the order of the world. Rollerball is a vicious and awful game. Why would he not want to get out? Anybody else would. Any logical person would. The only reason that one wouldn't is specifically due to intangible ideals like honor or pride. The world around him downplays and discourages the questions that Jonathan asks because they think life is good and the corporations give them everything they need. So why question it? By thinking differently, Jonathan separates himself from them. Jonathan is a man experiencing complex emotions and thoughts about who he is and the nature of his society, perhaps for the first time in his life. And as he visibly struggles to express these thoughts, thoughts that he has no words for, he has nowhere to turn for support. He's completely alone. And when you think about it that way, just calling the character a mindless and simple brute seems quite unfair. The world of Rollerball is eerily prescient today. It's a world where nations and borders no longer exist. Instead, people live under the governance of corporations. These corporations do not compete against each other. Instead, they all collude with each other to maintain the power that they're used to. Rivalries and prejudices still exist, but the elite do not care about race or gender. They are completely united in their desire for control. In one scene, we see the executives who run the world at a party. They make small talk and then, after drinks, go outside and destroy some ancient trees with a ray gun. The scene seems pointless, but the scene is important in that it shows the extent of this society's depravity. The rulers wield power simply for power's sake, and though they pretend to be civilized and benevolent, they are cruel and petty. Their ultimate goal is to destroy everything natural, including human nature itself, so long as it'll keep them in control. As for the rest, everyone who isn't an executive is nothing more than a corporate asset. You have no control over your own life. Individual wants do not matter. You only exist for others. We see this most explicitly in the case of Jonathan's ex-wife. When Jonathan became a star player, they awarded him a wife in recognition of his ability. So she is literally a trophy wife. When someone more powerful and important than Jonathan, an executive, wanted her, she was taken away and given to him. Shockingly, she accepts this and even defends it. The corporations have given her and the world so much, she says. Because of them, there's no hunger, no war, no poverty. And without them, who knows what the world might look like. They loved each other once, but her gratitude towards the corporations is much more important. Her individual wishes are a small price to pay to continue the comfortable state of the world that they all enjoy. We find out that in the world of rollerball, people don't seem to be required to have any education except for the basic amount needed to fulfill their allocated role in society. There are libraries, but the selection of books they provide is limited and most are heavily censored because this information is not necessary for the vast amount of people and they don't really want to know anyway. Jonathan's friends question why he would want to read it all when he could just have the contents summarized. Ambition is born of want. With every basic need provided for, people do not want for anything, even self improvement or happiness. Instead, they live dependent on the powers that provide their needs, rationalizing themselves into slavery because it's just easier. This is a society of narcissistic tyrants ruling over an ignorant and complacent people who live their whole lives sheltered from anything real and are either too scared or frivolous to even form their own opinions. Which kind of begs the question, in a society like this, what's the point of something like Rollerball? Rollerball is a game made to demoralize the common man. The game is so unforgiving that players have a high chance of being killed or crippled, no matter how good they are, and are encouraged to brutalize each other. It's a game that shows how frightening and ugly violence is, and how human nature is so cruel that men will not hesitate to use it against each other for the tiniest gains. The savagery of Rollerball reflects the cruelty of life itself and reveals the full fragility of man. It is designed to drive home the futility of individual life and reinforce the inevitability of death. The reason the corporations created Rollerball was because the people need some form of entertainment to keep their minds occupied. So they came out with this sport in order to give the people a form of entertainment that would excite them and provide them a glimpse of competition that has been eliminated from their lives, and at the same time to frighten them by showing them the violence that their rulers are protecting them from. We've seen the idea of murder as entertainment before and since, but Rollerball's approach is unique in that while Rollerball is a monstrously bloody sport, it is still primarily a sport. Rollerball is a game, and because it's a game and not a glorified killing ceremony, it can hold sacred and noble ideals, as it is possible for the game to be won with no killing whatsoever, and appreciated solely for the skill involved rather than the carnage. This further adds to the believability of Rollerball in its setting, and makes the later degeneration of the game into nothing but simple killing genuinely shocking and impactful. One difference between humans and machines is that machines don't require entertainment. Rollerball is meant to be another part of the system, but at the same time, it is outside of it. Rollerball players are not forced to mindlessly grind the role they could never get out of over and over. They can pursue excellence. They're allowed to pursue excellence. They face danger, but because of that, they have something to overcome. They are expendable, but they are also heroes because they're the only ones in this society who are able to rise above their meager humanity through the strength of their wills and their bodies. They are brutes, but because they're the only ones allowed to face death, they are the only ones capable of achieving higher ideals. Rollerballers experience what can only be felt facing what's deadly and uncertain, such as the loyalty that comes from having to entrust one's life to another man, the glory of a hard fought victory, and human dignity, which is born of man's willingness to fight for his existence against the humbling force of death. and not just by fighting for one's life, but merely having the courage to act in the face of danger and the unknown. This is how individual will is born, and neither the fearful citizens nor the stagnant elite can achieve it. Only rollerball players. We see this from the opening scene. The people stand for the corporate anthem at the start of every game, all of them totally still and in a trance, except for Jonathan, who beats his fist against his leg as he waits for it to be over and the game to begin. He doesn't respect the formality, only what comes after. The match, the only thing that's real. Going back to Jonathan and his ex-wife, we see that they both had genuine feelings for each other and are not happy with how they were separated by a corporate whim. Jonathan's wife, a normal citizen by birth, rationalizes and downplays both his and her concerns. Later on, as the wife of an executive, she is part of their circle and participates in the senseless destruction of trees, even though she does not enjoy it because everyone else is doing it too. Jonathan, a rollerballer, repudiates her with rashness, emotion, and finality. She is afraid of conflict and does everything to avoid it, even though these things are contrary to her true feelings. Jonathan, on the other hand, makes choices while others mindlessly obey. A society that has civilized itself away from violence still desires it, firing guns into the woods just to be able to feel any sort of control, a power made tangible. And this is immature violence. While Jonathan, understanding the human cost behind the violence, is able to both wield violence and reject it. Most people, like we see in the movie, having lived their entire lives insulated from violence, are content with being just an asset if it means they could live a quiet life. If the common perception is that people merely exist, disconnected from prior lessons of conflict and history, then indeed life is cheap because it is not backed up by anything. It's not backed up by a prior struggle, by the blood of those who came before. This realization is the last step in Jonathan's character development, capping his journey from a brute to an awakened humanist. Later in the movie, we see this really driven home in a scene where Jonathan makes the observation that even a plant grows towards the sun, but his words are brushed aside because he lives in a society so devoid of want and yearning that this idea is totally alien. People can't even relate to that, and all existence is taken for granted, reduced to a level below that of even a plant. Chillingly, they have lost nearly all capacity to appreciate what it means to be alive. Rollerball was released in 1975. The preceding year saw the release of John Boorman's Zardoz, which is best known for creating this. There are some similarities between the two. Both take place in post-apocalyptic settings and are about stagnant societies that are shaken up by the actions of a violent outsider. I like Zardoz more than most, even in spite of this, but it's ultimately a movie that tries to be epic and comes up short. Borman gives Zardoz some interesting dreamlike sequences, and his script is heavy in symbolism. However, the symbolism is obvious and the writing meanders, taking too much time to explore what turns out to be a simplistic society and leaving its characters underdeveloped. Many of these characters lack agency and do things only because the script needs them to, including falling in love. For a movie about human nature, this lack of sincere human feeling in Zardoz presents a pretty dire problem. And Borman's attempt to shore up these weaknesses through direction doesn't work, actually working against the script. The flowery directing does not give the movie earnestness, and it just seems cheesy. Borman's flourishes don't make the movie feel more epic, instead adding confusion or taking away the impact of its most ambitious sequences. Rollerball, on the other hand, has an unpretentious script and stark direction that works to its benefit. Nothing seems forced, because the camera does not linger on many important moments, and sharp close ups allow the viewer to see the full emotional conflicts and developments of characters played out across their expressions. Rollerball eschews portraying advanced science fiction technologies, only having a quaint depiction of a quantum computer that happens in one scene. This not only keeps the film focused on its humanist themes, but it helps make the movie timeless by avoiding filling it with low tech special effects sequences that would age badly and cause it to quickly become dated. Furthermore, unlike the fiery proclamations found in Zardoz, there is not one moment in Rollerball where a character condemns the society that they live in. Instead, we as the audience can see the horror and the absurdity of this world for ourselves. Unlike the mostly symbolic violence of Zardoz, Rollerball's portrayal of violence is brutal, though never gratuitous. Though it broaches the concept that violence is necessary like Zardoz, it doesn't shy away from it, doesn't shame it, nor celebrate it. Instead, it treats it somberly and with respect. Jonathan's actions do not inspire some kind of hackneyed, half-assed revolution like so many modern movies seem to want to push, which shows insecurity, a desperation to show their glamorized violence as righteous and justified. Jonathan's awakening needs no outside justifications or ultimate public validation. Zardoz is a movie that tells, whereas Rollerball shows, and these elements together make Rollerball feel sincere and confident. In Zardoz, Borman attempts to create his own humanist mythos, with Sean Connery and Charlotte Rampling as Adam and Eve. Its ending sequence reenacts straightforwardly the loss of innocence, exile from Eden, and the passing of the burden from man to son. Rollerball's ending is more ambiguous. Don't worry, the ending sequences are suitably rousing. But to this day, people walk away from the movie with different interpretations as to the meaning of its closing shots, much like the ending of George Stevens' Shane. Does our hero ride off into the sunset, or does he just fade away? Or is it something in between? The beauty of Rollerball, and what makes it a timeless film, is that by the time the credits roll, this no longer matters. Jonathan has shown the world his will, and the world is forever marked by it. He rises above the limits of his humanity. He overcomes violence and death. He defeats the perils of his own human nature and exposes the meager humanity of his enemies. In this way, the movie's ideals, embodied in him, are transcendent, even as his own image distorts and fades. Instead of spelling out where these ideals lead for the viewer is given the responsibility to decide that for themselves. This sort of mature filmmaking is what elevates Rollerball to being a timeless movie. It does not dilute its message with self indulgent parallels to whatever the hot button political topic of the time is, and its characters are complex and realistic, with human virtues and failings, rather than existing only as symbols. This is a message, a movie, that has a moral, but it doesn't sermonize. Instead, it starts a conversation. And it's a shame that many just hear the concept and dismiss it as some cheesy 70s ultraviolence, when that violence is depicted seriously and serves an important narrative role. Behind the violence, you get one of the great humanist fables of our time, and a triumphant celebration of the human will. And please do not watch the remake. Stay away from this. To wrap it up, I highly recommend this movie, and I hope that you'll give it a watch. Thank you, and have a great day.